All right, and we're back for our webcast about how to create strategy in a small business. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who didn't attend our first webcast in November, I'll give you a quick background on Ed. Ed Kless joined Sage in July of 2003 and is currently the Senior Director of Partner Development and Strategy. He develops and delivers curriculum for Sage business partners on the art and practice of small business consulting. If you want to learn more about Ed, I encourage you to visit his website, edkless.com. And quickly, before we start, I just want to let you know that we will take questions via the chat box, so feel free to use that to ask any questions. And we will also share some useful links throughout the presentation. So now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Ed.
Well, thank you, Romu. Really appreciate it. I appreciate the Sage 50 team letting me have this time with our prospects and customers here, and wanted to share some insights with the group about some stuff about strategy that I've, let's call it, stumbled across over the number of years that I've been doing consulting. And first start off with a brief belief about strategy that I think many people have, especially those in small and medium businesses. I think one of the challenges we face is that strategy has this mythical connotation to it. It seems like, you know, Jack Welch and his leadership team from GE go to some exotic place like Reykjavik, Iceland, and they, you know, lock themselves in a mud hut for a number of days, and, you know, they figure out what this massive strategy is, and then it gets rolled out to the entire company, and I think they have to burn the paper of the strategy to make sure it's the right one, because if it's white smoke, I mean, that's kind of the myth that is around strategy, and I think that becomes a little bit challenging for sole entrepreneurs, small businesses in general, because they think that this whole big thing around strategy has to be this big, huge thing that happens. And I think that is not only a myth, but it's also a problem, because it leads people to think that maybe perhaps they don't have to do as much thinking or communicating of strategy as they should. So hence the focus today on creating strategy in smaller businesses, smaller organizations. There's my particulars up there if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm probably pretty easy to find, but also obviously Twitter there at Ed Kless. So just go on and you know, connect with me there. This is really a story about questions. This is what questions are we asking, and this is perhaps one of the most important things that I think I've ever learned in business, is this notion of different types of questions that we talk about in business. This is how versus what matters. This is from a book called The Answer to How is Yes by Peter Block. It's up here, actually. But in this book, he really shares with us something that is quite profound, and that is that oftentimes in business, we only talk about what is eminently practical and things that are in the here and now. And he calls these how-based questions, and these are the ones that are on the left side of your list there. So how long is this going to take? How do you do it? How much is this going to cost? How do you get those people to change? How do we measure this? And how have other people done this successfully? And if you think about it, many of our conversations in business are just variations on those 6 questions. Certainly the it changes from industry to industry, from company to company, from region to region, from department to department, from two people in one set of cubicles to another set of cubicles just across the way. So even inside the organization, the it might change, but the nature of the conversation is often the same. We're often talking about very practical things. In fact, people who bring these questions up, this list of 6 questions in meetings, are often thought of as smarter in meetings. Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, how much is this going to cost, right? Or how long will this take? The problem is that, as Block puts it in his book, is that these how questions as human beings, they are our natural defense mechanisms against change. So if we want to block change, the way we do it is to ask very practical questions about something, right? Take the one quickly, how long is this going to take, right? If you ask how long is something going to take, notice that it really doesn't matter what the responder says. You can always dispute it, right? So how long is this going to take to do? Well, it's going to take about 6 months. Well, we don't have 6 months, okay? Or how long is this going to take? Well, it's going to take 6 months. Well, we'll never get it done in 6 months. See, because there's no relativity to it, right? So in a sense, what these how questions do is they set up the person who's about to respond to the question to be slammed down, right? Because there's no necessarily proper response to it because it can be debated one way or the other. What Peter Block suggests is that if we want to think more about vision and strategy in our organizations, we need to make sure that we're spending more time on the right-hand side of this slide, and that is asking these type questions. What refusal I've been postponing? What's the commitment I'm willing to make? What is the value of it to me? What is my contribution to the problem? What is the judgment we need to make? And what do we want to create together? The first half of this webcast series, which Ruma mentioned earlier, is about the creation of that vision. And I'm going to talk now in sort of the assumption that you've seen at least a little bit of that piece. I'm going to go over some quick highlights of it. But I want to make sure that those of you who did participate in that see where we are in the flow, and those of you that didn't, I want to give you an opportunity to perhaps go back and listen to that as well. What I'm going to say is stay with us here. I think that there's some insights that you can gain by staying with us today and staying on this strategy piece and hearing this live and perhaps getting a chance to ask me some questions or asking anybody else, asking questions of each other as you're moving through this if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of people. So I think that's positive. But do go back and listen to the vision piece, and then also after you listen to that vision piece, maybe give this a second listen. I think it might be helpful from a flow standpoint. Okay. So quick background, though, for those of you that didn't attend that first one, some quick background. Where we sit on the journey here is much of this stuff comes to me from this book, this In Search of Excellence book. This is actually a scanned copy of the In Search of Excellence that I stole from my dad when I was in college. You can see the corners are well worn, and if you were to open this up, you'd see that it's pretty highlighted and marked up. But this was the #1 bestseller, and it really created the genre of business books, and made the, now when this book was written, there was maybe 4 books on the business shelf. Now there's whole sections of actually there's no such thing as bookstores anymore. So anyway, there's a lot of books on Amazon on business, but Peters and Waterman posited to us 7 different lenses through which you could view an organization. They called this the 7S model. Both Peters and Waterman were consultants at McKinsey, and this McKinsey 7S model was something that they were very familiar with and that they used to organize their book. They said that these are 7 lenses through which you can view your company with different layers of magnification. They said, imagine that this thing that you see on the right-hand side of this slide is like the bottom of a microscope in biology class, right? And you would just turn the different levels of magnification on to see different structures, like you would see when you looked at your blood cells or the onion skin, right, in high school or grammar school. And you might put a filter on it, a blue filter or a red filter, to have different things pop out at you. Same thing here with these. These are different lenses through which you can view your organization. In their book, in Search of Excellence, and in the main McKinsey model, does not give precedence really to any one of these things. Yes, shared vision is in the middle, but I've seen it presented where shared vision, or shared values is not. And one of the things that I learned was a modified version of this, and that is that there should be precedence to the S's, and that shared vision, which is the subject of that previous webinar, should be first. You should have that in place first in your organization. What is the shared vision of the group? And then strategy comes next, right? And then strategy comes next, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Hanging off strategy, just in the interest of completion, explaining this idea, is the staff, the people that you have. I personally don't like the term staff, but it begins with an S, so let's go with it. I prefer, people, colleagues, team, something like that. But anyway, so staff. And then the staff then have different components to them. There's skills, right? The skills that the people have, the structure, how they're organized together, the style with which they interact with one another and with the entirety of the organization and perhaps with customers, and then also the systems that, again, the people use, right? So those are the 7 S's, and we're going to focus in on this notion of strategy a little bit. Before we do, I just want to share one quick analogy with you about this, because I think it's important. I don't know if I mentioned this just as part of looking at the bottom of the microscope, right? But this is a picture of red blood cells, all right? Beautiful when you really look at them. This is red blood cells. And what the analogy here was shared with me by John Mackey. John Mackey is the CEO of Whole Foods. I'm sure most of you have heard of Whole Foods Market. Great organization, really fantastic. He wrote a book about 3 or 4 years ago called Conscious Capitalism. And in this book, he shares an analogy of profit in a business. A lot of people think that creating strategy and even just a business in general has got to be focused around this notion of profit. And what he says that profit is a result of the business, not the cause, right? Profit is a result, not the cause. And he says it's just like red blood cells in your body, right? In your body, you need to produce red blood cells or you're going to die. And in fact, that's one of the definitions of death, is the inability of your body to produce any new red blood cells. So therefore, you're dead. So what that means is that we absolutely need red blood cells in order to continue living as an organism. However, very few, maybe none of us, wake up in the morning are thinking, on the to-do list today is red blood cell production, right? Red blood cell production is a function of all of the other things that we do. It's a function of the fact that how we eat, exercise, all of those that breathe, the air we breathe, all of the things that we have in our lives. That ultimately is what helps us produce the red blood cells. But we don't get up in the morning to produce red blood cells. And the same thing is true, I think, about organizations. We shouldn't be getting to the office thinking, how can we make a profit today, right? The profit is the result. Peter Drucker calls profit the price we pay for tomorrow. In other words, we have to have profits, otherwise we won't have it tomorrow. Now, maybe some of you are sitting in not-for-profit organizations and saying, well, we don't have to worry about profit at all. Yes, you really do, but you happen to call it reserves, right? But what not-for-profits do is they still need to have more outflows than inflows, right? Because if you're not getting contributions in excess of what it is that you're trying to pay out to do for whatever charity or organization you're trying to help, well, you're not going to be in business very long, even as a charity. So there still needs to be this idea of profit. But the cause, and what's interesting is not-for-profits often see this a lot better than for-profit organizations, because not-for-profit organizations clearly have some kind of an established cause that they're focused on that's outside of themselves. That maybe that's a cure for AIDS or helping turtles in Biafra. I mean, I don't mean to make light of any of those. Just whatever the cause is, that not-for-profits seem to focus better around that. And I just think that for-profit organizations ought to do some more thinking about that notion of purpose and be focused on those things rather than thinking it's about profit. All right, so that's kind of the basics for this. And just once again back here, we're going to talk now the rest of the time here about this notion of strategy. So in the flow of things, the previous webcast was about shared vision. We're now going to talk about the second of the 7 S's, and that is strategy. So what we're going to take a look at is strategy beliefs versus realities. as I mentioned, I think that there are some maybe myths, if you will, but certainly there are beliefs about strategy that exist in many organizations, and here are three that I think are most prevalent. One, this notion that strategy is about analyzing your situation, right? There's a lot of analytical work that goes into strategy, lots of numbers. We got to be focused on those, the analysis piece of these things. We often think that strategy is about planning, right? Strategy is about planning. We have to go to Reykjavik or off-site meeting or whatever it is that we need to do, and we're going to put this big, huge plan in place. So strategy is about this, the development of and the focus on this notion of a plan, right? And then lastly is this notion that strategy is about what to do. So what is it that we are going to do? We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And I believe these are myths. And like any myths, there are some truths to these, but what I found is that there are three counterbalancing realities that, if you think about it in terms more of the reality than of these beliefs and myths, you will end up with in a better place in thinking about your strategy. And here's the parallel. So the first one, strategy is more creative than it is analytical. All right. So again, the myth or belief was that strategy is about analyzing the situation, but no, strategy, when well done, is more about creativity and innovation and thinking about those things than it is about analyzing, especially the current situation. Right, the current situation, or even our past situation, and more on this in just a little bit. Ultimately, in many organizations, strategy is execution. And what do I mean by that? Well, I've worked with an awful lot of businesses on helping them set strategy, and then oftentimes I'm just usually there for the beginning part of the process where we're talking through this notion of what is strategy and perhaps how to develop part of it. And I'll check in maybe with them 3 or 6 months later. I'm like, well, how's it going? And they said, well, the strategy isn't working. I said, well, what do you mean about the strategy isn't working? I said, well, is it being executed? I said, well, no, because we're off doing all of the other stuff. I said, well, then we don't know if the strategy is bad because you're not executing the strategy. You're still stuck in the past of doing all of the stuff that you previously did, but you're not executing on the strategy that you have. So I think an important part is to understand that a big part of strategy is, in fact, a culture of execution in the organization, that things need to be able to get done even after the development of the strategy. So that's the second piece. And then lastly, and I think that this perhaps was one of the biggest insights that I ever had about this, and that is strategy is more about what it is you're going to say no to. Right? What is the organization, and perhaps you as an individual, if we're down to that level, what are you going to say no to? What customers are you not going to take? Steve Jobs put it this way. He at one point said, I'm most proud of what Apple hasn't done. Right? Because the temptation is to go off and do some of these other things, thereby distracting from what the strategic plan truly was, right? So strategy is more about what are you going to say no to. In this way, and here's another analogy for you, I think strategy is like going on a diet, right? It's a little bit like going on a diet. What's the best diet? Well, the one that will work for you, the one that you're not going to cheat. That's the best diet. And in a lot of ways, strategy and strategic planning is like that, right? What's going to work for you? The one that you'll do, the one that you'll actually execute on. So think just the diet one is a pretty good analogy. Okay, we're about 20 minutes in now, and I'm just going to pause for just a few minutes and just say if anybody has some questions that they'd like me to address at this point, I'm happy to do that. So go ahead and start typing those in. I am looking at both the chat and the Q&A, so you can put that wherever you feel most comfortable. So if you'll just go on and take a look there, I'm going to scroll through. I think I did see a couple of questions, so I'm going to look at those. But if you've got a question, you should be typing it already. All right, so go ahead and do that. All right, let's see here, questions. Oh, somebody's having some problem with sound. I hope that they were able to figure that out. All right, well, so it wasn't really a question. That's fine, though. Okay, great. Well, sorry about that, Catherine. I hope you were able to get back in. Let's see if we've got anything else here. No, anything else in the chat window? Nope. Okay, so far so good. But if you do have a question, go ahead and, again, type it in at any point. I will check those just as we move through the webcast here. So if this is something that you've got a question on, go ahead and type it all in. All right. So the next thing I want to share with you is the beginning point for strategy, right? This to me is about what's called the MOASQ. The MOASQ. It's an acronym, MOASQ, and it stands for the Mother of All Strategic Questions. Mother of All Strategic Questions, MOASQ. And this, I think, is the believed MOASQ. This is where most people start their strategic conversations, and that is this. How much revenue do we need to make in whatever time period for the plan? So is this a 2-year strategy, a 3-year strategy, a 5-year strategy, a 10-year strategy? What's that period? And how much, and how are we going to achieve that revenue, right? And how are we going to achieve that revenue? So what's the revenue target, and how are we going to achieve that revenue? And that's the beginning point of almost every strategic planning meeting or methodology that I've ever seen, whether it's balanced scorecard or any of these methodologies that are out here, oftentimes begin with this, I think, a focus on this notion of revenue and how much revenue are we going to produce in the given plan. And I've always equated this, and I got this from Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who wrote some great books, but this one I believe is in his book called The Black Swan, right? And this is where we take 5 years of history. This happens to be in pounds, but just substitute dollar signs. The numbers here are irrelevant, right? So we have these 5 years of history for our organization. Our current year, we're at 140,000 million. Again, put as many zeros as you want after this. We were at 133 minus 1 years ago, 122, 115, 110, well, exactly 100 a year, 5 years ago was our first time that we broke $100,000 or $100 million, again, whatever. And we've had this growth, right? So we have 5 years worth of history. So if we apply the MOASQ here, what we can say is that, we have here this 98% probability of it falling within this range that we have up here, right? So this is like, it could go like this, could go like this. But for the most part, it's going to be, we have this trend line going, right? And this is where most people start. The problem with this is that this is based on a theory. This says that the future is like the past plus 5 to 10%, right? Because that's what we've shown, right? The future is like the past plus 5 or 10%, right? And we've got a huge probability of that happening. The problem is, and this is where the black swan comes in, is that oftentimes we don't see the thing that's coming that is going to be really the problem. Let's take, for example, this were the strategic plan of a turkey before Thanksgiving, or in this case, Christmas, right? This is the over on this side here, instead of money, this is the happiness factor of the turkey. And along my x-axis here, this is the days of life of the turkey. And the turkey starts out here, life's pretty good. I'm getting fed, right? And everything's going along here for the first 200 days, first 400 days, 600 days, right? And then what we have here is this little thing here is Christmas, but or Thanksgiving, but according to the turkey's plan here, it was 98% probability that this was going to happen, right? The problem was this dramatic outlier here that just killed us, right? And I think that the challenge becomes is, all right, if we can't use the past plus 5 or 10% to be our perceived belief system in the starting point for strategy, well, what do we have to do? What should we be talking about? If not revenue, then. And here's what I'm going to share with you. I think it's this. I think this is really the real MOASQ, the real mother of all strategic questions, right? How much value are we, our organization, how much value are we going to create for our customers in our given time period, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, in that time period, and how are we going to do that? See, the thing that this question does, the thing that this MOASQ does, the real MOASQ does, is it focuses the organization outside the organization. See, the strategic plan that talks about revenue and revenue generation and revenue creation inevitably turns itself inward on itself, and we start talking about marketing plans and how many leads do we need in order to get people into the marketing mix and funnel or upside down funnel or whatever what you're looking at, right? So, but it becomes very internal. It becomes very focused on us, right? Whereas I believe what this question does is in asking the how are we going to create value question is it focuses us in the proper place, which is outside the four walls, or even if you're virtual, outside your organization and toward what you should be talking about, and that is your customers. And how are you going to create value in this time period? And this then, I think, leads us to more innovative potential thinking, because we've got to take not only what we know about the past, but we also have to take what our beliefs about the future are, right? Not only for us, but also for the customers that we serve. And what are we going to need to do 3 years from now to create value for them, because things are changing today, and we know things are changing today. So I really like this notion of starting at this point about the value creation outside the organization rather than thinking about revenue. And this was of great import to me when I came across this concept or this notion, and I think it really makes a difference. Fortunately, in more recent years, since I won't say I discovered this because I'm sure it had been thought about before, but I discovered in that it came to me about 7 or 8 years ago. But in the meantime, though, I found a couple people who are happily in agreement with me, and this guy is one of them. And I just want to share a little bit of his insight with you here. Dr. Jules Goddard, who is a professor at London Business School. And I love this notion. He says, strategy is the rare and precious skill of staying one step ahead of the need to be efficient. Now, if you think about efficiency and Lean Six Sigma and all of those things, Lean Six Sigma, Guru, Ninja Turtles, it's always about efficiency, internal efficiency. How can we be more efficient, right? And we're eking profitability out of this notion of efficiency, doing what we're doing more efficiently, right? And I'm not against efficiency, by the way. I'm not against it. I think, yes, we all should be. I, for one, like to take the least amount of steps when I'm unloading the dishwasher so that I don't have to, make 12 trips over, right? So I structure the stacking of said dishwasher in such a way that that will happen for me. But I do think that for most organizations, this notion of efficiency is the learning curve. If we're not learning, if we're not adjusting and doing things to make ourselves do it faster, better, cheaper all throughout, well, then we're probably in trouble anyway, right? And I don't think that eking out the last 5% or the last 10% of efficiency is very helpful from a strategic planning standpoint, right? It may be better at day-to-day operations, but it's certainly not something that should be truly involved in a big part of the strategy. Because as Goddard says, if we can innovate, right? If we can innovate, if we can create new value for customers on a go-forward basis, well, then our efficiency actually doesn't matter all that much, because we'll be different enough in the marketplace so that people will notice us, and we should be able to command a higher price for it because it's new, it's innovative, it's creative, and it's not something that they can get other places. So I really like this notion of innovating for growth. If you want to grow, and that's if you want to do, the focus is on innovation. It's not on just increase revenue by 10% and let's get pound the pavement and get more salespeople out there and shake the trees loose for more leads. it's about more innovation and creativity that we can do inside the organization. So three rules on this, and here's another person, or it's actually two people, that are Raynora and Ahmed, who also are in agreement with my line of thinking. And I think these are just different ways of stating this first one, but some people might resonate with this. So better before cheaper, right? How can we make our product, service, whatever it is we have to offer, our knowledge, how can we make it better before we think about ways of making it cheaper? How can we increase revenue before worrying about costs? And again, this is not necessarily, when I think about revenue here generation, I'm thinking more about innovative revenue, right? Organic, some people say revenue, before trying to cut our costs. How can we command a better price before we increase our volume, right? So what is it that we can do to be better from a pricing perspective? And by the way, I think that's the subject of our third webcast in the future is going to be, I'm going to do some stuff on pricing with you, but price rather than worrying about volume. And then I add a fourth one to their three rules because I can't help myself, and that is people before process, right? People before process. We have to concern ourselves with the people in our organization before we worry about the process. And I'm not saying that I dismiss process. That's not what I'm saying at all, right? As I said, I like to take the fewest steps to unload the dishwasher, but I am saying that we need to worry more about the people side of things in today's day and age. Think of it this way: if you can certainly be efficient with things. Right? Be efficient with the things, with the process of the things. But I want you to concentrate on being effective with your people, right? So efficient with things, but effective with people. Said another way, manage the work, not the people. Manage the work needs to be managed, but the people need to be guided, right? Because that's the human being side of things. All right. All right. So. Let me show a couple of different things. I want to share with you just another quick way of thinking about strategy. This is also from Jules Goddard as well. And that is that, and I really like this quick graph because this lays this out pretty well. I think this is another people get mixed up on this notion of strategy versus budgeting, right? Oftentimes, budgeting is the stuff that's based on the past, right? We take last year's plus 10%, minus 5%, or zero-based budgeting, and we gotta decide from there, right? So we have the past and the future, or the past and potential here on the x-axis, right? And budgeting, yes, that's more about the past. Then we also have the plan, the internal plan versus the competition. Right? So this is internal versus external. Might be another way of looking at this y-axis, right? So budgeting is clearly internal, right? Budgeting is internal. Again, I'm not saying, and I'm not being dismissive of a budgeting process, but that's the stuff where we take the past into account, and that's the stuff where planning is more important. When we're talking about this notion of strategy, and again, this is from Jules Goddard, it's more about outside and the competition and more about our potential in the future than it is about anything that happened in the past. So I like this 2x2, a good way of looking at this. A different way, but I think that's saying something very similar to this, is this notion of the strategic triangle. And this was developed by, curiously, another McKinsey consultant. I mentioned Peters and Waterman earlier, but this is from Dr. Kenichi Omai, who was a consultant out of their Tokyo office. And he's the one who came up with this strategic triangle, also known, by the way, in the literature as the 3C model, so customer, company, competition, you can see there. And what he says, and I do like this definition as a definition of strategy, what is it that we can do to be better than the competition at what's important to customers, right? What is it that we can do to be better than the competition at what is important to customers? And then he has this triangle where you're the company down here, right? And you're trying to understand the needs of the customer. Well, I should do this along the vertical axis here, right? So you're trying to understand that. But at the same time, we have the competition, and what we have to understand is that the competition is also trying to understand the needs of the customers as well. This is one of the mistakes that I think that we often make, is assuming that our competition is stagnant and that they are not taking the customer's needs into account. We like to think of our competition as just this stagnant there, this is what they always are, but no, they actually do strategy too. At least we think they do, right? So they are also trying to understand what the needs of the customer are as well. So we've got this tension. We're both trying to find out what the needs of the customer are. Down here on the bottom, what we're also seeing is our ability to differentiate ourselves from the customer, and this is a push-pull, yin-yang kind of thing, right? But what I want to show you is that I think we have this triangle right here, and what if we were to, if we differentiate ourselves, in other words, this is my elbow here is now this side of the triangle coming out. Notice that the angle, the slope of the angle, is lessened, right? It's longer. It's a longer journey because it's going to lengthen, right? But the slope of the angle isn't as harsh. So it's much easier for us to get up to and understand those needs of the customer. But it is perhaps a longer process, right? It is a longer process to really truly get to understand those needs of the customer. But in doing so, we're differentiating ourselves. Now, notice the differentiation is a push and pull because guess what? If you innovate, if you create, if you do something different, it's very possible that your customers are going to, your competition is going to catch up to you and do some of those things as well. So the real key is when you're innovating is to notice that a lot of the stuff can be copied. By the way, what's easier to copy, your process or the people? And the answer is process, right? So a longer term sustainable competitive advantage is always created when you focus on the people before the process, when you focus on the relationship stuff and knowledge of the people before you focus on process, right? So that's what's going to create the longer term sustainable competitive advantage, not the process, because the process stuff is the stuff that is more easily to duplicate, all right? So that's the synopsis of this notion. I really like this tool for thinking about strategy. Okay, and again, we're 20 minutes through. I'm going to go take a quick look over at the Q&A to see if any have come in. So let me just flow through. Femi asks, get slides from the previous session. I'm pretty sure we can do that, especially if you go click on the link that was sent out earlier. I know that you can watch that and perhaps get the slides there. Mahmoud, asks, is there a database that lists all strategies that fail or succeed in the history of small business? I don't know. I can tell you, to me, I don't think I'd look at it much. Because I think that what we really need to do is create something new, innovative, and different, and not worry so much about what people have done in the past. I think we can potentially learn from how others have failed in the past, but I'm more concerned with learning something new in the future. But thanks for the question there. I like that. Okay, Solomon, what do we do when we feel like all innovations have already been employed and it seems like we are out of ideas and nothing more new could be done? Oh man. Solomon, wow, that's not true. I see you're from Nigeria. So one thing, there's a U.S. president. I think it was Calvin Coolidge. Now I'm about to slander poor Calvin Coolidge because I think it was he who said it. But it was a U.S. president in the early 1900s who actually thought about shutting down the patent office because he said, quote, everything that can be invented has been invented. Yeah, not so much, right? There's a tremendous amount of innovation, right? There's a tremendous amount of innovation that is constantly taking place and disruption. There's so many new things that can happen. I mean, I'll give you an innovation right now that I know is going on that we need to be focused on, but things like driverless cars. Certainly, what about the innovations around Bitcoin and the blockchain? These are tremendous innovations that are just beginning to have their impact. So yes, definitely, Solomon, take a look around at some other things. There's lots and lots of innovation still happening. Yes, Gaston, I already talked about that. AI, thanks, Femi, you're all about me. Thanks. AI as well, artificial intelligence, really huge. In fact, I just started using an artificial intelligence assistant to help me schedule meetings. Fantastic stuff, really good. So yeah, there's lots of innovations that can happen, and there's innovations. That's another session I do, by the way, called Innovating Beyond Technology. And just the gist of it is that the first thing you need to innovate, Solomon, is your language. You have to change your thinking around this. So let me get on to some other topics, though. But I really appreciate this interaction. This makes this session so much better to do when I've got some folks chatting with me here. So thanks a lot. First place, perhaps, Solomon, to maybe to take a look at this. And this is on the left-hand side of this screen over here. This is the cave paintings from I think Vichy, France. And you can see there that it's got people with spears and they're hunting the, I don't know, wildebeest, buffalo. I have no idea what that animal is. But I'm pretty sure that that cave painting is a SWOT analysis, because this is the oldest and most basic strategic planning tools. And this is to go through a list of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization, right? So that's what SWOT stands for, S-W-O-T. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, a lot of people know about this, but what few people know about is that these are intended to be stacked on each other like this, right? So, in other words, our strengths and weaknesses are usually counterbalancing one another. In fact, sometimes a strength can also be a weakness in a different form. We just think about it in a different way, right? And also, because sometimes people are like, well, we have a whole bunch of weaknesses, but no strengths. Well, that's not true, because if you think about a weakness, if you think about it, you probably can in some way turn that into a strength as well. Very odd how that works out, okay? So strengths and weaknesses counterbalance with one another. Same thing with opportunities and threats. They often are, there's two ways to state them. One is an opportunity, one is a threat, and you need to try to keep those in alignment. But, and this is where I think this gets more fun, is that once you do that, once you come up with the list, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, also look for the vertical stuff, because this is the stuff that a lot of people miss, right? And that is lining up your strengths with your opportunities. And this is where you get a huge bang for buck here, right? Is if we can say, oh, we've got a strength in this area, oh, there's an opportunity for us, and we can align those things, that sometimes points us in the correct direction of what our strategy can be in the future. So if there's an alignment of both a strength and an opportunity, right? The opposite is true sort of for the weaknesses and threats, right? If we have a weakness and there's also a threat in the same area, that might be perhaps something that we should look at negating in some way. Even if it potentially means, by the way, exiting the market for whatever that is. You know, maybe we want to get out of a certain market and don't be in that market anymore since there's a weakness and a threat. We might even consider possibly selling off that piece of our business to someone else or a competitor if that's something that we're not interested, especially, of course, if we have a strength and an opportunity that we want to pursue that has nothing to do with that old opportunity and threat. So you see how this works. This is a great tool. So really, I guess, as I said, it's one of the oldest and most basic strategic planning tools. I like it, but I don't like it as much as this one. My second tool that I'm going to share with you is what I'll call a start, stop, continue. And this is asking this same series of questions, or a different series of questions. What is it that we want to start doing? What is it that we want to stop doing? And what is it that we need to continue doing? What I like about this is two things, really, that I like most about this. Is one, it is intended to be developed bottom up in the organization as opposed to top down. The SWOT analysis, in general, not always, but in general, the SWOT analysis is often done from the top down. The leadership or the owner of the business might look at this first and then share his or her thinkings downward in the organization. Whereas the start, stop, continue is oftentimes best implemented by first going to the people, right? The people in the organization, right? Who on the front lines, let's say, with customers, and asking them what they personally want to start, stop, and continue doing, and also asking them what they think the company should start doing, stop doing, and continue doing. right? And then rolling those up different chains in hierarchy if you have them, right? And the implementation of start, stop, continue really lends itself more toward that bottom-up bubbling of things. And what I found in doing so is it often leads to something that once that strategy is talked about and disseminated and say, yes, we're doing this, that there's a lot more buy-in for that strategy. Why? Because the people in the organization feel like they've been more a part of it, right? So I think that's the strength of start, stop, continue over the SWOT analysis. Okay. Next tool, and we've got about 10 minutes left, and I've got a couple things more that I do want to share with you. Is this one? This one was shared with me a number of years ago, but it comes out of some thinking that was done by, of all companies, Xerox in the mid-1960s, right? And here's what they found. They found that the number one driver, or the number one driver. Let me start on the right-hand side. Financial performance is most driven not by focusing on financial performance, but by looking at customer satisfaction, right? So as customer satisfaction goes up or down, that is ultimately what drives financial performance. So if customer satisfaction is dipping, is going down, it is a great indicator that your financial performance in the future is going to suffer unless you can get that customer satisfaction going back up in a different way, right? So the number one predictor of financial performance is customer satisfaction. The mistake people make is that oftentimes thinking that they can predict future financial performance by looking at past financial performance. This cannot be done. That's why this is a major problem. All right, it's a major problem in thinking. It's one of a bit of the downsides of the whole business intelligence movement. Not that business intelligence isn't good. There's great stuff coming out of business intelligence, but where it is a danger is it's when far too much emphasis continues to be put on analyzing financial performance, which always takes place in the past, because they do call it accounting, right? We're accounting for it. We're accounting for what happened yesterday. And the predictive value of past financial performance is not as good as looking at customer satisfaction things. And we're going to talk quickly about one of those. And of course, the best predictor of customer satisfaction is colleague or team satisfaction, right? So if individual team members of the organization, if they are more or less happy, that is a good predictor of whether or not customers are going to be happy or not, and then therefore financial performance. So this is the flow. Now, there is one downside to this, and that is that there has been some thinking on this by the halo effect. I can't think of the author's name, but the book is The Halo Effect, or Rosenzweig, who in his analysis of this situation says yes, but what is the predictor of colleague satisfaction or team satisfaction? And it turns out to be that he made a good case for it being financial performance. So what do we have here? Excel circular error, right? So we do have this loop. I think there's some learning to be done, and not to say that this is linear, but it is more of a loop that we have to flow into, right? And we do have to know that one does influence the other and that we have to look at all three. The danger, again, is that people tend to look at the stuff that's only financial performance metrics. That's all they look at. Because why? Well, because we got a lot of numbers and it's easy to look at. That's why. All right, so let me just talk about some quick questions for strategic planning. Let me do that build here. Okay, so how can we educate our people better than our competition in both technical areas and people skill areas so that they'll be more valuable than counterparts at other companies? So again, looking at ways to increase the knowledge of our organization inside the organization, but not only technically, but also their people skill areas. So good place to start from a strategic standpoint. Another question to be asked: how can we become more valuable to our customers? By doing two things. One, listening to them, right? So actually getting customer feedback from them, and then understanding their market, so their future market, and applying those two together. Right? So we have to listen to the customers, what are the customers saying, we have to understand what the customer's marketplace is, and then apply those two things together, and then perhaps focus on those things in the future. And then lastly is what 3 things can we change about our company's practices and policies that would make us more valuable to make us more valuable to our customers. So these are some things that we can look at just from some other strategic questions to ask more at the beginning of things. All right. I want to now just jump to and talk about what to do next, and then I want to leave a couple of questions for a couple of moments for some last-minute questions here. But what to do next on this, right? So the first thing I'm going to suggest is that if you're not going to commit to execution, do nothing. Okay? If you're not going to commit to execution, do nothing. Why? Because it sucks the life, it sucks the morale out of an organization to go through and understand that there's been strategic planning or a strategic planning process put in place, or thinking about strategy or trying to execute on strategy, and finding out that nothing happens and nothing changes. So if you're not going to commit to execution, not just the development of a strategy, but actual execution, do nothing. And I do mean commit, right? This is why the analogy of the diet is a good one, right? The diet is a good one because what's the best diet? Well, the one that you can commit to, the one that you're not going to cheat on. And again, very similar to this notion of dieting, what should you do? Research the strategic planning tools that you happen to like and decide to which one you can commit, right? So I presented to you a couple of different tools that you can look at, whether it's the SWOT analysis or the start, stop, continue, or looking at some questions inside your organization, perhaps even focusing on the MOASQ, the Mother of All Strategic Questions, which again is how much value are we going to create in the future, right? Any of those things, whichever one you seem to be most resonant with as I talked about them today, that's the one that I would push you towards. And then lastly, have I mentioned that I think you need to commit to this? Okay, commit. Like the 3 most important things in real estate: location, location, location. The 3 most important things in strategic planning is commit, and not support, but commit. Here's the difference between support and commitment, okay? This is the difference. It's like bacon and eggs for breakfast. The chicken is supportive. I don't want that. The pig is committed. We want skin in the game. Skin in the game. And perhaps the biggest thing that you need to commit to in this, and the hardest thing to commit to, is just like a diet, because what is it you're going to say no to? What customers are you not going to take on in the next 12, 24, 36 months? What are you not going to do, right? Just a reminder, I do have this radio show, Soul of Enterprise, which you can get to at thesoulofenterprise.com. I mentioned Dr. Jules Goddard. There is an episode in which I interview, or myself and my partner Ron Baker, we interview Dr. Goddard. So if you want to look that up and get his brilliant strategic insights from that, highly recommended. I think if you go to soulofenterprise.com/Goddard, Goddard, you will go immediately to that episode. But if you go to the website, you'll see there's lots of stuff out there. All right, I'm going to lastly look at some questions here, and then also, Romu, if you could come back, or anybody else wants to ask me a question, we can take them off mute, would be fine. So let me see what we got here. All right. Let's see. Gaston asks, Ed, can you send us an example of a small business that developed their strategy under this model? No, because of non-disclosure. Sorry. Look, don't think that you need like a big, thick plan, right? Doesn't need to be, right? Doesn't need to be pages and pages. That's the MBAs. That's great. That's what they'll tell you. It's like this massive thing. No, it's 1 or 2 basic ideas that everybody in the organization understands that we're focusing on, right? So don't get so hung up on having some kind of a documentation. It's really more about communicating this with the language. But Gaston, thank you for that question. It's a great one. Is the start, stop, continue a sort of process in a loop? Yes, all of these things are process. Thank you, Femi, for giving me a chance to say that. Strategic planning is a process in and of itself. And it's not like you do a strategic plan and then you don't do one for 36 months. You're constantly revisiting the strategy. How often do you go through this, the details and creation of all brand new process? Probably not going to happen all that much. Somebody just turned off their mute, please.
Hey, Keith, you watch the show.
I think it's Keith. I think it's Keith. Okay, thank you, Keith. All right, good. It's constant. My recommendation, by the way, for a strategic planning check-in is every 4 months. I know a big thing in business is quarterly, right? But that's big business because they got to report and the SEC and all this stuff. But small businesses, I find the best reporting period and check-in period for checking in and looking at and perhaps even modifying strategy is every 4 months. 120-day cycle as opposed to a 90-day cycle seems to work a lot better. 6 months is too long, right? And 5 months isn't divisible by the year, so 4 months it seems to be a little bit better. Okay, Mahamud also asks, is it preferable to execute a value engineering session at the beginning of a new business? Yes, you always want to do value even before strategy, right? So value, shared vision and values need to be done before strategy. Ed, historical models, data models has limitations. There are best practices you can stress on measuring people and customer satisfaction for a small business. Thanks for this question. Net Promoter Score would be the thing that I would possibly talk about, which is, in fact, I did have a slide on it, but I skipped over it in the interest of time. What is the likelihood that you would recommend, here I'll put it up, this is the question to ask, what is the likelihood that you would recommend our products or services to a friend or colleague and try to get that out there and have every customer answer that question? So that's the one. And for internally, it's not so much that you're rating them, I want them to take a look and rate you. It's really more about the team sharing their insights about the organization. Goddard, G-O-D-D-A-R-D. Keith, you spelt it right. Yeah, G-O-D-D-A-R-D. Jules Goddard. So let me just, I can go to his. I know his name was on the quote, but let me double check that. Yeah, G-O-D-D-A-R-D. Thanks, Keith, for giving me the opportunity. All right, now Jim asks, I'm really intrigued by your observation that asking new and better questions is an important part of the strategic planning process for an organization that's stuck. How can I jumpstart the questions we ask? Okay, that's a good question. So good, you're already on the line here, Jim, with that. I think one of the more important things about question asking would be to just go back here. I'm going to go back to the second slide actually that I showed, and that is, are you asking some of these what matters questions first? Because this is by far the easiest way to jumpstart the conversation. Do not look so much at the practical, right? All of the how stuff, but instead look at the questions that are more challenging and difficult, and in some ways are not about the practical, right? What do we want to create together is not a practical question at all. Not practical. It's not practical, because I don't want to talk about practical. I want to talk about the creation of something new. Right? What commitments are we willing to make is another question, but these are not practical. So the first thing that I would suggest is perhaps move off the practical and move more toward, in these strategic sessions, move more toward these what matters type questions. All right. Yes, I'm going to take one more question that I have here, and then I'm going to wrap things up because I know we're over time and I want to make sure that I honor that commitment to you. So here we go. Kelly says, I like your point that strategy has to be more creative than people usually do it, but there's still a role for data and analytics, right? Question mark. All right. Can you talk a little bit more about how to balance the need to look back using data and also look forward using creativity? Yeah, I think the most important thing to note on this is that because businesses generate an overwhelming amount of financial data, by the way, using tools such as Sage 50C, and that's fine. That's fine. They're great, and we absolutely need them, or otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? But I think what's important to note is that data can come from other places too in the organization, like Net Promoter Score, right? And all I'm suggesting is that we seem to look at some of that data that is not financially related in some way, because yes, you're right, and Kelly, you're right there. There is, of course, a role for data and analytics, but I think there's unfortunately way too much of an overemphasis on the analytics from a financial perspective. I would much rather see you analyze financial data a little bit less and customer-facing data such as Net Promoter Score a little bit more. So that's how I'd answer that. Wow, thank you. Oh, all right. Onu, you snuck one more in on me. How can a small business identify and match its strengths and weaknesses in comparison to its competitors? You got to ask around. Like the strengths and weaknesses are internal, right? You don't have to worry so much about that. That's just something you know. You're going to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. But when you're talking about understanding the competitive market space, you really just have to dedicate someone and a little bit of time to understanding who the competitors are, right? Unless you think that what you're breaking into is a total what's called blue ocean, that's another kind of blue ocean strategy where there is no one in that space at all ever, right? In which case you don't have to worry much about competition. But it's always good to have an eye out for what is your competition doing. So again, because sometimes you might need to quickly copy them, especially if it's just a process thing that you can get a hold of. So, right? In the end, though, I would much rather you focus on outside your customers and creating value for customers in the future, and worry less about the competition when you're talking about strategic planning. Okay? So. Fermi is questioning about, is there really a blue ocean strategy? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Cirque du Soleil, which is the example in the book, was absolutely a blue ocean strategy. That was brilliant, the mixing of those two things together. Maybe that's the only example I can think of off the top of my head. But yes, I do believe that there are ways to marry two differing things together and carve out a niche or a niche if you're in Canada that will make that work. So. Anyway, thank you so much for the questions. Just Fermi and Onu and Keith and Mahamud, Gaston, just looking through, and of course Kelly and Jim as well. Solomon, Catherine, I really love these questions because again, this makes this doing this side of this so much easier. So really appreciate the questions today. And Romu, back to you for any closing thoughts you might have.
Thank you so much, Ed, for your time, and thank you guys for all those great questions. Again, for the few of you who didn't get a chance to attend the first webcast, we shared the link in the chat box if you want to view the replay. Also, we'll share the replay of this webcast with you guys probably on Monday, and again, a few of you will get a chance to win Ed's book. And our next webcast for this series, which will be around pricing, will be in January, and you'll start receiving those invites soon. So thank you so much, guys, and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.